Hello, welcome to today's webinar. We'll be talking about investing in urban infrastructure. This webinar and program has been brought to you by the Open Architecture Collaborative, the AIA's Housing Knowledge Community, and we have some technical support by EDI International, so we thank them. Hi, my name is Garrett Jacobs. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Architecture Collaborative. I'll be facilitating the discussion today and helping direct your questions to our panelists. With that, our panelists are Anne-Marie Lubenau, FAIA. She is dedicated to engaging people in the process of design and increasing the understanding of the built environment and really its impact on our lives. She's the director of the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence. It's a national design award that recognizes transformative urban places distinguished by their economic and social contributions to America's cities. Anne-Marie previously served as CEO of the Community Design Center of Pittsburgh, has a really great on-the-ground experience, and was a 2012 Harvard Loeb Fellow. A little fun fact, she also once navigated her way out of getting lost in the Florida Everglades on a canoe trip. Then we have also Scott Spencer. He's the Associate Director of Advocacy and Influence at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and their work in advancing community-focused policies, practices, and strategies that increase opportunities for children, families, and the places where they live and foster their success. He serves on the board of Smart Growth America, the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities, and the Center for Community Project. He also has a background in architecture and environmental studies, which is great to see people that have architecture and design experience going into other fields. So we're grateful to have his experience in the philanthropy world to share some of his insights. He also served on the selection committee for the Rudy Bruner Award this past year. He prides himself on being very accurate in picking the Academy Award winners every year. So that's a practice that he has. It's a little fun fact. Today's learning objectives, and I'm going to read these pretty carefully because I think they're important, really understanding and describing how public investment in urban development can address community welfare, including significant challenges like affordable housing, education, and the regeneration of communities, and those effects on the economy, environment, and social change. We're going to discuss how to integrate new development into broader sustainable vision that taps into and leverages community resources, improves the quality of life for residents and the surrounding community. So go a little bit deeper into the social impacts of the work that we do. Demonstrate the value of engaging in collaborative public-private partnerships in the planning, design, and development of public buildings and housing. And lastly, we're going to touch a little bit about the design and development that addresses environmental objectives. A little bit more on the description. We're going to dive deep on talking about kind of the visionary urban planning and public investment that really is a hallmark of progressive communities. There are 5 winners of the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence this past year, and they are powerful examples of how government investment in urban places builds and strengthens communities, can catalyze economic development, and inspire civic pride. All of this which would ensure equitable, healthy, and socio-economically vibrant cities. While they're all different, all 5 of the winners offer inspiring models of how municipalities have tapped into local, state, and federal programs and funding to really invest in their urban infrastructure. They create places that bring people together, promote inclusivity and access, foster creativity and innovation, and lift the human spirit. Collectively, they illustrate how government investment in physical places can build and strengthen communities, catalyze economic development, and inspire civic pride. We're going to go deep into 3 of the winners this past year. One of them is the SteelStacks Art and Cultural Campus, which was the transformation of an abandoned steel plant into mixed-use cultural and entertainment district in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We'll talk about the Bruce Bolling Municipal building, a community-oriented mixed-use development integrating public school headquarters, public meeting space, and transit in Boston, and the Iberville offsite rehabs. It's the rehabilitation of 26 scattered site historic houses into 46 homes for low-income families in New Orleans. We'll utilize these case studies developed by Rudy Bruner that document the development and impact of the projects in their communities to really talk about the larger issues that we've discussed. Anne-Marie and Scott will discuss kind of the observations and themes that emerged from the selection committee discussions. We'll get a little bit of an understanding of under the hood, how that worked, especially including the role of public leadership and investment in affordable housing, arts and culture, and community development. A little bit of the logistics for today. If you have questions, please submit them in the question box or technical concerns, and I can address them during the presentation. I will then ask your questions in the last 10 or 15 minutes after our Anne-Marie and Scott have gone through the presentation. Just basic copyright materials, compliance statement from the AIA, just please glance over that quickly. And following the presentation, webinar will be located on the recording will be located on our YouTube channel, as well as the presentation will be available. But please do fill out the follow-up survey to get your CEU credit by this Friday, and that will be available in a follow-up email in 1 hour. And with that, I will give the screen over to Anne-Marie.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen just to confirm this is working?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this webinar. It's really an honor to be able to talk with you this morning and to share some of our observations and lessons learned from the most recent Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence, and to do this in tandem with my friend and colleague, Scott Spencer. So we are going to approach this as a bit of a tag team effort. I'm going to provide a really brief overview of the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence. I suspect many people already know about it. If you don't, you should. We're also going to talk a little bit about this theme of investing in urban infrastructure, which emerged from the selection committee discussions about the 2017 winners and really dovetails into the national conversation that's happening right now and is in the news again. And then we'll just briefly touch upon 3 of the 5 winners that not only relate to this topic, really all 5 of them did, but particularly those that where there is a really strong community development story, as I know that's something that's important to the AIA housing knowledge community. So let me again, a quick overview about the Rudy Bruner Award for Urban Excellence. It is a national urban design award that recognizes transformative projects that contribute not only to the physical environment of cities, but also the economic, environmental, and social vitality of cities. It is a biennial award. Every 2 years, we recognize 5 projects across the United States with medals, 1 gold medal, which receives a $50,000 cash prize, and 4 silver medals that each receive a $10,000 cash prize. Our process is pretty intensive. We really look to understand how these projects go together. So in addition to the typical requirements of a design award where we ask you to describe your project and provide some images, we ask for information about how the project came together and ask questions about its impact. We also put together a new 6-member selection committee with each award cycle that's convened twice. First to select the 5 finalists, and then a team from our foundation goes out and visits each of those 5, visiting them and meeting with people involved with the projects to gather more information, which we will bring back to the selection committee, and then they will use that information to determine which of the 5 is elevated to the gold medalist. When that is done, we then publish those case studies online and in a book. To date, we've recognized 83 projects across the United States. Many of them are concentrated in the larger urban areas on both coasts, but we do have them located throughout the country, and they range in size from $150,000 installation of neighborhood murals up to multi-billion-dollar urban mixed-use downtown development. As I mentioned, each of our case studies is published each of our winners is documented with a case study that is published as a book with each cycle, along with lessons learned and observations from the selection process. We also publish them online. This topic of infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, really bubbled up from the selection committee discussions. Partly when we first convened the committee, it was early February, so there's a lot of national conversation after a pretty remarkable presidential election, and there's a focus on this topic of infrastructure and the need to invest. And as we collectively talked about the issue of infrastructure, I think traditionally we tend to think of it as streets, roads, utilities. And what really emerged from the conversation was thinking more broadly that as it's mentioned here, the social and economic infrastructure of our country, really thinking of infrastructure as housing, as schools and education, as arts and cultural facilities, really the elements that make up the fabric of our communities. And thinking back to our winners among the Rudy Bruner Award, they really encompass all these different aspects of urban infrastructure, going back to Pike Place Market, our first winner, but also examples of housing, infrastructure, transportation, arts and culture, and educational facilities, and thinking about food security and urban spaces. So our 5 winners this year are SteelStacks Arts and Cultural Campus, the transformation of a former steel plant in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the Chicago Riverwalk in Chicago, Illinois, the sort of reclamation of the riverfront in downtown Chicago, the Bruce C. Bolling building in Boston, Iberville Offsite Rehabs, and La Cretz Innovation Campus in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on 3 of the 5 that particularly speak to the connection with community development, and also sort of ways that they are an outgrowth of a broader community plan. As I mentioned, with each round, we put together a new selection committee. This is our selection committee from 2017. We always have a mayor. We have Mayor Knox White from Greenville, South Carolina, and we really seek to bring together people who have a diversity of perspectives and expertise in urban excellence, as in Scott Spencer is second from the left. I'm just really delighted to have Scott join me and sort of share some of his experience and observations from this round. So really, as we summed it up, what really rose to the top this year was the idea of strategic public action can stimulate private investment, not only because of the dialogue about investment in infrastructure, but also I think what we're the expectation that we will probably see diminished federal support for investment in urban communities. The other aspect other themes that emerged from the conversation, we really kind of found organized around 3: aspiration and ambition, embracing and engaging, and restoring and renewing. So I'm going to begin talking about each of the 3, and again, encourage Scott to jump in. One thing I should mention is that I'm basically providing a very brief little introduction to each of these projects. There's a lot of depth in all of them that is hard to cover in just a few minutes. So encourage you to go to our website and learn more about them. So Iberville Offsite Rehabs is the rehabilitation of 26 scattered site historic houses into 46 homes for low-income families. It's located in New Orleans, and it was designed by Kronberg Wall Architects and Planners of Atlanta and developed by Red Melon Restoration and Development. As I mentioned, this is really a pretty remarkable rehabilitation of historic homes in varying degrees of condition, scattered through a couple of neighborhoods just sort of north of the French Quarter. Like all of our projects, the developer had some pretty ambitious goals to provide housing for families displaced by Hurricane Katrina. More than 10 years ago, the city is still in the process of rebuilding and particularly building replacement housing, renovating existing homes, also broadening the appeal and relevance of historic preservation, and demonstrating that it is possible to incorporate environmental sustainability and ADA accessibility within the restoration of historic properties. Just to give you a little bit of a context, the little stars indicate the houses that make up this project. The French Quarter is down in the bottom right-hand corner. So you can see it's it's a neighborhood that has a lot of small-scale development. There's some parks, including the new Lafitte Greenway. And also there are several projects in sort of orange that illustrate some major redevelopment projects or fairly recent development projects, including a medical center and redevelopment of two former public housing developments. This will give you a sense of sort of the look of the neighborhood, the scale. Homes in the neighborhood range from mid-19th century to early 20th century, but for the most part are small, narrow, one-story frame structures. I mentioned the redevelopment of public housing projects, including a Hope 6 redevelopment. This is one of them here, so it'll give you an idea of a much larger scale. And that was really part of one of the goals of Red Melon Restoration and Development was to find ways to maintain that small scale character of the community and the historic architecture that's really valued by people in New Orleans. And he, using a lot of detailed mapping, sought out properties that were blighted or abandoned, and then very carefully restored the exterior of them. All the houses in this project were eligible for historic tax credit, so they were required to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. But they also worked really hard to integrate sustainable building into these units, and actually got approval from the National Park Service to pilot the use of spray foam insulation, which is something that's generally not allowed. And this is an effort to sort of find ways to kind of permit new uses and new technology. They also found clever ways to integrate solar PV panels on the buildings, including the addition of sheds in a way that was not obtrusive on the street, as well as accessibility in the units. And in addition to the design itself, the developers developed packets for incoming residents to try to look for ways to connect them to the history of the properties themselves. That was really a kind of a foundation of this project, was maintaining the historic diversity and people longtime residents in a community where the demographics are rapidly changing as new investment and new people move in. And
Marie,
really,
I think that's actually one of the important points in this is that just in a little bit of context, New Orleans is a rapidly changing city, and the neighborhoods just north and east of the French Quarter are rapidly changing in terms of income and also in racial composition. And one of the roles of sort of the leadership that government can provide is trying to ensure that those neighborhoods maintain a sense of integration, both with income and with racial diversity. And what this project really did for me in sort of looking at it is not only did it restore the buildings and sort of maintain a beautiful historic context, but for the folks who live there. And particularly when you see how many other cases in our past where affordable housing is identifiable, it has that mark when you walk down the street. This does not do that. So it actually provides folks a level of dignity that they may not otherwise have. They don't necessarily get it on the streets all the time, and so the last place that they need to lose dignity is when they walk into and out of their front door, and that's what this provides for them.
Yeah, and that was something, and actually this is the an image of a house with the orange doors is one of these properties. So one of the comments we heard from people when we were doing the site visit is that the houses stand out. They stand out because of the quality of the exterior restoration, and they've actually become symbols of kind of positive development in the community, and it really suggests a different approach to affordable housing development across the country, and reiterates the value of scattered site infill development or scattered site rehabilitation, which is not without its challenges. So one of the things we ask as part of our application project is for perspectives from different people who are involved in the project's development. I mentioned that this was developed by Red Mill and Restoration Development, a small private mission-oriented development firm with support from the City of New Orleans, the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, the Housing Authority of New Orleans, and it was funded largely through through low-income tax credits. And also supported a broader Choice Neighborhoods transformation plan. So here, this quote from the director of NORA really illustrates how this project helps to support their goals. And as Scott mentioned, among the many wonderful aspects of the project, the idea that it reiterates the value of historic preservation, but also, reiterates the importance of that historic restoration, not be limited to those of the wealthy, but be something that is available to everybody.
Yeah, I just love the fact that they stand out by fitting in.
So, anything else on this one, Scott, before I move on?
I think you covered that pretty well. Yeah, I having seen some of these houses, it is remarkable that the unremarkable nature of walking through that part of that neighborhood, and I think to me that is one of the most outstanding aspects of it. And again, it is sort of a role that a government can do in this context in New Orleans to maintain sort of a cultural integrity through its architectural integrity.
Yeah, and I think, again, Scott, you just touched upon the role of government investment. So I think while the project was sort of largely driven by the private developer in this case, it would not have been possible without the government support of low-income housing tax credits and the support of the local agencies. So again, reiterating that importance of that public investment in these projects. So moving on to a different scale and a different type of public investment, this is the Bruce C. Bolling Municipal Building in Boston, which is a mixed-use, community-oriented mixed-use development integrating public school headquarters, meeting space, retail, and transit. It was designed by Makanu Sasaki and developed by the City of Boston. It is, as I mentioned, it is a transformation of another historic building. In this case, actually, there are 3 structures that are integrated into the new development. It had a number of pretty big goals, including reinvesting in an existing long-neglected commercial corridor and community, looking for ways to improve the quality of Boston Public Schools' working conditions and services, catalyzing economic development through the investment, with it showcasing the City of Boston's commitment to one of its historic neighborhoods, demonstrating or creating a 21st century municipal facility, demonstrating that in so doing this, the economic and efficient use of government funds, and promoting a healthy work environment, as well as retaining historic building facades and contributing to the street life of the community. For those of you who know Boston, this neighborhood, interesting, the project is located in Dudley Square in Roxbury. It's actually the geographic center of the city of Boston. If you look at the little map in the bottom left-hand corner, downtown Boston is sort of in the top center. So this is a couple miles away. If you look around, you can see it's an interesting mix of different scales of development. It was historically known as the gateway to Boston and was a kind of a second commercial center to downtown Boston itself. It has long been a major transportation hub, initially rail lines, and more recently it's the site of a major bus terminal that services about 30,000 people pass through each day. Unfortunately, like many urban neighborhoods, it went through a period of decline over several decades, beginning in about the 1950s with white flight. It was also the site of several major redevelopment efforts, including public housing efforts there's actually once a plan to run a highway through the center of the neighborhood that was actually deterred through citizen activism, and it instead became the Southwest Corridor Project, which integrates a bike path and public transit. This photograph from when the project was getting started illustrates the three surviving buildings are in the photograph. Buildings in between have been torn down. The big bus station I referred to is the horizontal rectangle just below the triangle of the building site. As I mentioned, this was a project of the city of Boston, and really, for many people, refer to as a legacy project of Mayor Menino, although it's been strongly influenced by Mayor Walsh, the current mayor, as well. It was seen as a really signature project for the city, and a clear signal that the city was wanted to invest in the neighborhood, and that's really outlined in these goals. The project was the sort of the successor of many failed initiatives to redevelop the building. This time it was kicked off with a series of 2 design competitions, and this is a cover of the booklet of one, and again outlines the goals of being accessible and relevant, collaborative and inclusive, efficient and adaptable, sustainable and economical, and iconic and inspirational. From that launch, there were several submissions. The winning one from Mekanau Sasaki, and it's a partnership between Watertown, Massachusetts-based Sasaki and the Dutch firm Mekanau, and this is a kind of preliminary vision that they presented as part of that competition process that emerged from conversations they had with the community about the vital role that the site has played in the community's history and the kind of desire to have a place where everything comes together. And that's really the kind of the goal that emerged that informed the design and the programming of this building. From that, they came up with a proposal to knit together the facades of the 3 surviving buildings on the site with a new structure in the center, using masonry as the kind of fabric that ties it all together. Inside the building, there are a number of public spaces that are places that create common ground for the community and the 500 employees that work for the Boston Public Schools that come to this building every weekday. The key space is a 2-story ground floor lobby where this photograph is taken that is an area for informal meetings for people to get a bite to eat. Alongside it are several commercial retail spaces that also open onto the street, and on the balcony are spaces that serve the public as well. They have on the ground floor 3 cafes that serve the community and are also locally owned businesses.
And I think that's an important point here. Just a little bit of background and context. Where the Bolling building was where the end of a transit line used to be. The orange line, which was an elevated line, which was torn down, and it was moved a little further away from the community. So the building provides, I think, a little bit of restoration to sort of a public infrastructure that was removed out of the neighborhood. Secondly, the role that the role the government can play in trying to increase economic opportunity for local residents. As the owner of the building, they can afford to find ways to diversify their tenancy, and so the support of local businesses inside the building, which then have a very active consumer base upstairs in the building. And then lastly, I think the thing that this project really did for me was with the introduction of the public school headquarters in the building. I mean, one of the things we discussed was sort of the accessibility and near transparency of some governmental functions, in particularly important governmental functions, for folks who whose kids are probably going to school, are those same folks who would be riding the buses to the terminus station and have easy access to the headquarters building by being able to walk there directly across the street.
Right. And I would add, too, that something we heard during our site visit was the change it also made for teachers working within the school district, that just having a place where they had access to the services can only help to improve the quality of services that are then being delivered to the students of the school system. And as Scott mentioned, a key part of this is the idea that these are locally owned businesses. So the city administration, under both Mayor Menino and now Mayor Walsh, has worked very diligently to ensure that the businesses in these buildings are locally owned. They are businesses that are serving not only the needs of the employees working within the building, but the community as well. Also, a major component that was added when Mayor Walsh came into the office is the Roxbury Innovation Center, and this is located on the second floor. And this is part of Mayor Walsh's commitment that the residents of the neighborhood, particularly the youth, have an on-ramp to the innovation economy that is such a powerhouse in the city of Boston and the Boston region. And this is a view of that center. Also, as Scott mentioned, there are public spaces comprise a significant part of the building. So the first two floors of the building, the first floor is the retail and the lobby. The second floor has a combination of meeting spaces. This is the space where the school board meetings happen. Also, public art is integrated throughout the building. So the mural on the wall was done by a student in the school system. And then the top floor of the building, the sixth floor, has community meeting space. And actually on the second floor as well, there's a place where if your child is entering the school system, you can go in to register your child. So again, trying to make it as transparent and accessible as possible. This is a view from that top floor deck. So you can see the high rises of downtown Boston in the distance. And again, just a perspective from a community member. And actually, this photo also gives you a view of the Dudley Station bus transit stop that's there. Really, the significance of bringing back to life a building that was really a major symbol for the community. And I think an extraordinary example of the role of civic leadership. As I sort of look back across all of our Rudy Bruner Award winners, while a number of them, the local municipality plays a major role, I think just the fact, to the degree to which, in this case, the city was a driver, really stands out.
Yeah, and it really does restore a beating heart to the community, to the center of the community, makes it into a destination rather than a terminus.
Right. And actually that was one of our selection committee members observed that it really makes Dudley Square a place to go to rather than a place to go through, which it has been for so long. So we're going to wrap up with SteelStacks Arts and Cultural District, which is our gold medalist for this year, which is the transformation of a former steel plant into a mixed-use arts and cultural district in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The design of this campus is really a collaboration among multiple firms. WRT was the lead in terms of the plan for the campus, and then multiple firms participated in the design of individual buildings. And the lead developer of the project is the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Bethlehem. Key partners in the development included the local PBS station, PBS 39, and Arts Quest, a major local arts organization. This before and after will give you a view. I think like many American cities, Bethlehem had for many years benefited from a strong economy driven by the steel mill and then following its closure, then really struggled to find a way to repurpose a pretty enormous over 2,000 acre site. The goals in this case were to really find a way to repurpose what had been a fairly internal, focused on industry campus into something more public and cultural. In so doing, finding a way to preserve and restore the historic built fabric rather than just sort of erase it. At the same time, using it as an educational tool to tell the very important story of steelmaking that provided, really was the heart and blood of the community for over 100 years, and to be a catalyst for the redevelopment of a broader 126-acre district, and doing it in a way that was transformative, transparent, and inclusive. So doing it in a way that engaged the community in the process. Little bit of context. You can see the site, actually not even the entire site, but the specific site of the campus is the orange site in the center. The pale yellow indicates part of the broader former steel plant. The historic city of Bethlehem, which dates from the 1700s, is across the river in the upper left-hand corner. Like many cases where industry is located, or industry from the 19th century is located, is directly adjacent to a community, residential community where a lot of the workers lived. So you have an interesting juxtaposition of like large scale directly adjacent to kind of a traditional neighborhood fabric. Like many steelmaking communities, the steel mill, when it was operating, was a pretty dominant presence in the community, both in terms of noise and pollution and scale. And even after its closure in the 90s, continued to be, a big landmark within the community. And here you can get a sense of the scale of the residential community, and then the blast furnaces behind. This is a view of the heart of the campus, which is composed of several different buildings. Like the Bolling building, there's a desire to create a 21st century civic commons, to find a way to move the community forward from its past in a way that also respected and honored the history, not only of the site and the buildings, but the people who worked there. There are several components to the campus. One is the Stockhouse, a historic 19th century building, the stone structure here, which was renovated into a regional visitors center. And this was completed with using historic tax credits. I mentioned that two key partners in the development are PBS 39, the regional public broadcasting station, which is the building to the left, and then just to the right is the Arts Quest headquarters, which is an organization founded in Bethlehem, which has been providing cultural programming for the community for several decades. There's also the Levitt Pavilion, which is an outdoor amphitheater, the backdrop of which are the historic blast furnaces. And this provides hundreds of outdoor concerts throughout the year. And then really the connective piece that links all of these together is the Hoover Mason Trestle Park. And this is the repurposing of the historic Hoover Mason Trestle, which was created to help support and improve the delivery or the process of steel making, moving rails, moving cars along rails to move components of the steel making through and past the blast furnaces. And today, the new park that exists provides a way for people to see and kind of experience the blast furnaces up close, as well as to get an overview of the rest of the campus. Integrated throughout is interpretive signage that was developed with the local heritage organization to describe the process of steelmaking and to help people understand the lives of the men who work there, as well as their families, just adjacent to the plant.
Right there, I think when you see that in the sign there, it says work, identity, and pride. And I think that's one of the things that this building helps to evoke, and sort of the pride of its legacy, of what the people who live there and work there, the pride that they put in their work, the pride that they have in their community, and this is again sort of a role that government leadership is playing in making a nod to that past legacy and that past history, and bringing it back to a productive use.
Right. And I think particularly, when we, and again, this is part of the dialogue we're having as a country today, that there are many communities across the United States that have, were once, industry was once a major economic driver, and it has since closed or has, shrunk to a small portion of what it used to be. And how do we find ways to, help again honor that experience and honor the people, but also look for ways to, rather than bring back what used to be, think about what can be in these communities. And the other piece that factored into the discussion throughout all these projects, including this one, was the integration of technology. So in addition to the signage that we see pictured here, the project also includes an interactive web-based platform that you can use either using your phone when you're on site or going to the internet, that has additional interpretive material, including video and information about that helps increase your understanding of the process of steelmaking and the community. And again, public art. I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I was just going to very quickly. When I saw this project, I think one of my immediate responses was, I never thought I'd see this in the United States. There's a project that I saw in Essen, Germany, in the Ruhr Valley that was similar to this, and I just marveled at it. And again, the same context applied. It was a rich industrial place that had decided to change its business practices, but they found a way to bring it back and actually make it a center of community and make it a destination for a place that people may would otherwise forget. And I think they've done that very well here.
And Scott mentioned an important aspect of some of the learning that informed this project. That one of the things that ArtsQuest did as a partner in this project was organize visits with people in Bethlehem to visit Essen, Germany, and the Ruhr Valley to look at ways that other places had repurposed industrial facilities or steelmaking facilities, and that's something that resonated with me personally as well, both as the granddaughter of a steelworker and also having lived and worked in Pittsburgh for quite a while, where there were many efforts to try to find ways to honor the steelmaking legacy there. So, here we can see an example of public art that was commissioned as part of this project that honors that history. And then the other thing you'll notice when you see the views of the site at night are the lighting of the blast furnaces. The blast furnaces were really envisioned to be kind of the backdrop for musical performances, the backdrop of the commons, as these significant symbols of the city and the site's history. And here's an image of one of the outdoor performances, again with the blast furnaces as a backdrop. I'd say the other piece in terms of community engagement is that ArtsQuest has worked very hard to be mindful of the changing demographics in the community. So whereas historically the community initially was made up of European, Eastern European immigrants who are working in the mills, today that is changing, and there are more immigrants coming from Central and South American countries. So they are thinking about that as they program the outdoor concerts and other activities that take place on the campus.
One last thing I'll say about this is it really demonstrates the power of partnerships and making a project happen, but it also says to me a lot about how communities sort of punch above their weight. I think there may have been people who, when this was conceived, didn't think it could be done. But again, this role of leadership says, we're going to do what people don't think we're able to do, and do it well and make it succeed. And I think there's something to be said, especially in smaller towns and places that again we may tend to forget about how leadership can actually demonstrate itself by punching above its weight.
Anne Marie, are you there? I think we lost your audio.
I'm here.
And Maria, I think we lost your audio there for a minute. Oh, sorry about that, folks. While we're figuring out audio for Anne Marie, maybe please, Scott, if you could talk a little bit about the plans, if you know about, for this project specifically, for the residential area around where this project was just built and developed.
You mean SteelStacks?
Yeah, for SteelStacks, because there was a lot of, someone is commenting about how there was a lot of residential areas for the former workers around the area that also has a lot of historic housing. And if that is kind of was talked about during the process.
It was not talked about specifically during the process, but I know a lot of the conversation is about whether or the catalytic effect that a project like SteelStacks could have in attracting both people and investment back into the community. But to recollection, it was not a part of the original scope of the project.
Gotcha. Thank you. I have a question specifically for you, and sorry, we're still trying to figure out some of these audio technical issues. But Scott, with your excellent, great. So I was just going to ask Scott a question, but Anne Marie, if you want to finish up with this project, please do.
Oh, sure. So this is, and we're just at the very end. So we talked about the impact to the community, and then, and I'm sure Scott, while I was unfortunately disconnected, was able to talk about some of the observations from the selection committee. And I know just when I lost the connection, Scott, you were talking about the idea of communities punching above their weight, and that was something that really was a kind of important aspect of the conversation, the significance of being able to share this story with other communities. So that really is kind of wraps this up with the just sort of reiterating some of the themes that we've talked about, and then also just reminding folks that we have we've got 83 winners altogether that highlight other stories that touch upon these themes that are available on our website.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those case studies. I think it was a great range of housing, scattered housing development, urban, municipal projects, and then one that's a little bit more of a public infrastructure and commons for the space. So thank you for sharing kind of the diversity of projects themselves. We have, of course, some questions coming in, but Scott, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is, with your background in architecture and knowing that most of the people in the audience right now are architects, what have you seen in kind of either being involved in the selection committee or your development in the philanthropy world? What have you seen as the most powerful potential architect's role in developing some of these more visionary efforts or community-based efforts?
Boy, the architect's role. Well, I will give it to you from my own from the place that I came from and getting into architecture, which was the ability to engage the community, and for me, one of the biggest lessons out of that is how we as a profession engage sort of the next generation to see themselves as a part of not only the design process, but the community change that may be happening around them. In too many instances, we don't involve younger people, and we are often then surprised about how they vote with their actions. How people will leave your community, how people will not participate in the spaces that you're designing because they've just never been a part of the process. And then secondly, about how we can be effective agents for introducing more people to the importance of of quality design, the integration of the public and private realms, and the use of open space so that it can so that we can create communities for all.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I've definitely seen the architect play the role of translator also, and kind of the bridge between a lot of these municipal projects, the developer and the community. So definitely want to echo that. Thank you. In the SteelStacks project specifically, was the existing mass transit network enhanced or improved, or was new transit access created for the area?
In the SteelStacks, that's in terms of mass transit, I don't think anything was specifically added to the site, although I think a bus may be routed through it. There were infrastructure improvements that were made to enhance access into the site itself. You know, as a steel mill, it had been largely, you know, separated and walled off from the community, but not quite to the degree, not necessarily a special investment for transit.
Gotcha. What provision, this again is for the SteelStack project, what provisions were made for restoring and maintaining the blast furnaces and all the miscellaneous kind of steel work at the site?
That is a terrific question. You know, one thing that was not illustrated in the slideshow is that there are numerous other buildings that surround the blast furnaces that the redevelopment authority is actively looking to repurpose. The blast furnaces themselves have been an interesting challenge that the redevelopment authority is working to address. There is one of the things that they're trying to figure out is the cost to maintain the furnaces. They are actively assembling funding to maintain it. That was one of the questions. Maybe Scott can speak to this. I know came up in the selection committee discussion is what does it mean to maintain them? You know, as sort of an artifact, and that kind of balance of leaving something a little rough versus making it very pristine.
Yeah, you know, and I can't recall our own conversation around that, but I think you were right. It was one of those ongoing conversations about whether the stacks would disintegrate over a period of time. You know, what was the role and responsibility of maintaining, you know, their vernacular quality.
So the answer, so there is a plan is being put into place to both to maintain them and to fund the maintenance. The specifics were not available because it was being in the process of development when we did our site visit last year.
Great, thank you. There's a question that is specifically about one of the Dutch-based companies that helped develop one of the case studies. Excuse me, but also in terms of their ability to engage the community, you know, and I think
sure.
that just talks a little bit more about, you know, a lot of these projects being, you know, somewhat developer and municipal driven, and some with developers that are not necessarily local. So how do you really maintain, or, you know, kind of look into their ability to make sure they're doing genuine outreach and kind of know maybe some of the anchor institutions locally, even if they're not local themselves?
Sure, good question. So specifically for the Bruce Bolling Municipal Building, there are two components that I might not have mentioned in the presentation. One is that the project is located within an area that for which a strategic plan was completed in the early 2000s. And for this project, the City of Boston created a community kind of input mechanism known as the Dudley Vision Advisory Task Force. So there was, partly as a result of this community, it was a very active community that in fact had been the site of so many redevelopment efforts, both positive and negative. They were very involved. So that mechanism, partly facilitated through the City of Boston, existed. And then also our understanding of the kind of evolution of the design was that Francine, who's the lead with the Dutch firm, had been teaching at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. So she was in the neighborhood, and she actually, in the process leading up to the interview, spent time talking with people in the community. So that's sort of the gestation for that illustration that I shared with you as part of the presentation. So they played an active role. They had, the team included Sasaki, a local firm, and then throughout the process, there was the active engagement of the Dudley Vision Advisory Task Force, and that has actually continued past the development of the building. One of the things, one of our team members over the past year attended a follow-up meeting that was addressing specifically the topic of, well, what kind of additional development do we want to see come in here? Because that is a rising concern. Boston is a really hot market right now, and while everybody wants to see new development come into a neighborhood that hasn't seen much in a long time, there's also a deep interest extending from the mayor's office through the community that there be a way to do it to make sure that the residents in the community benefit from it. And it's not just bringing in new investors who will push residents out.
I'll go from a more generic standpoint, Garrett, and say that part of this can also be, if we're talking about sort of the role of government leadership and things like that, it's how they articulate this in the RFP process. I mean, they can actually, call on either some joint ventures, some local ventures, some engagement with places like, community design centers as a part of the function for ways to engage the community. And by doing that up front, it's sort of cooked into the cost and the process of the project, but it also then demonstrates sort of the commitment by local governments in again, in much more generic sense about ensuring that people who are impacted by these types of projects, even though they're positive projects, are also a part of the process along the way.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for sharing, Scott. I think that's a really interesting idea, and the potential for having that discussion of who would be in the room to decide what that community engagement process would be that's required on RFP, I think could be a pretty powerful engagement process in and of itself. So that could be, kind of allowing the decisions to be placed in different community groups' hands that will then influence those who kind of come from the outside. Would be pretty meaningful in some of my experience.
Right. And I think just to touch upon again the importance of the role of the city leadership in the Bolling building project, the fact that was made, that the goals were articulated right up front about the importance of this being a project for the community, in which the community was involved in the process, was really critical. So that making sure that the government, the city leadership is held accountable and holds the team accountable for that is, I think, really sets a strong kind of emphasis on that.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have one more detailed question of the houses in New Orleans. Are they owner occupied or rented? And did the city just take over the ownership of the blighted properties and then turn them over to community members or the developer?
So these are all rental housing. For the most part, the rent is subsidized through the Housing Authority of New Orleans. The city, the properties that comprise the project are a mix of city-owned properties that were transferred for the development, as well as I think some may have been kind of individually owned, but the city played a significant role in being able to facilitate that the transfer of property into the project.
Gotcha. One final question. Do you do follow-up with any of the award winners to kind of see the impacts 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road?
That's a great question. We have been working towards that. To date, we have not, it's not a formal part of our process. Our case studies are really a snapshot in time, but one of the things we are beginning to do is to check back with some of our winners. We did do a project, and there's actually a publication on our website about 10 years out. The award was first made in 1987, so I think it was around 1997. We did go back to all the winners to date and look for some lessons learned. But that is, as with any urban project, some projects continue to evolve. Pike Place Market, I think, is a great example of one that has been nimble and responsive. And there actually is a post on our website about kind of how that project is continuing to build equity in the community. And we also have some projects that have since closed, which I think there are lessons to be drawn from those as well.
Of course, thank you for sharing. And for anyone who'd like more information or to get on the email list of the Rudy Bruner Award, please visit their website, and you can see the case studies there as well. With that, it is 10 o'clock on the East Coast, probably 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So if you could please just follow up with the survey that you'll receive in about an hour. Do that by Friday to get your CEU. And once again, thank you for the fantastic presentation and sharing some of the lessons learned from the selection committee, and Marie for your work, and Scott for your work as well, and sharing your perspective from the philanthropy side of things. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Scott. Thank you.
All right. Have
Thank you.
a good rest of your day, everyone.